The Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 21st chapter.
Glory to you, Lord.
When Jesus entered the temple, the chief and priests and the elders of the people came to him as he was teaching and said, "By what authority are you doing these things, and who gave you this authority?" Jesus said to them, "I will also ask you one question. If you tell me the answer, then I will also tell you by what authority I do these things. Did the baptism of John come from heaven, or was it of human origin?" And they argued with one another. "If we say from heaven, he will say to us, 'Why then did you not believe him?' If we say of human origin, we are afraid of the crowd, for all regard John as a prophet." So they answered Jesus, "We do not know." And he said to them, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I am doing these things. What do you think? A man had 2 sons. He went to the first and said, 'Son, go and work in the vineyard today.' He answered, 'I will not,' but later changed his mind and went. The father went to the second and said the same, and he answered, 'I go, sir.' But he did not go. Which of the 2 did the will of his father?" They said, "The first." Jesus said to them, "Truly I tell you, the tax collectors and the prostitutes are going into the kingdom of God ahead of you. For John came to you in the way of righteousness, and you did not believe him. But the tax collectors and the prostitutes believed him. And even after you saw it, you did not change your minds and believe him." The Gospel of the Lord. So you should have received a song lyric sheet when you came in. You're going to need to pull that out now. You don't have to sing along, as I mentioned earlier, but we are starting this week's sermon out a bit differently. And we're going to have a music video, and it's from 1984, which means that it's not high definition quality like we have today, right? And the mouthing of the words and the actual sound doesn't necessarily sync up. Anyway, so it's a guide, so if you don't know the song, you can follow along. So I'd like you to sit back and enjoy this morning's MTV flashback, when MTV actually had, music videos and video disc jockeys, and I will explain why this is our entree to the sermon in just a second. You know the song, it has a pretty good beat, and you can dance to it, right? The release of this actual song was a little bit before I got to control the radio dial, which I feel like we all just need to laugh at that, right? Radio dial. But I still grew up loving it, not because of MTV or because of the depth of the lyrics. It's actually pretty repetitive, and it doesn't have a lot of melodic depth to it. But because of that rebellious nature of John Cougar Mellencamp, a little bit of that lives inside of all of us. Some of us more than others. And my heart can't help but cheer when the little boy at the end, he rolls up his sleeves and he puffs up his chest, mostly because I always root for the underdog. And that song pumps me up, and it makes me feel like I can do anything that I set my mind to. But I also know that much of what this song touts is fighting the establishment and questioning authority. And Lord have mercy if that isn't all we've heard about recently. I am exhausted. I personally feel like I've been in the boxing ring for 5 rounds with John Mellencamp, and I need to call my preacher because I'm black and blue from just watching the fight. Anyway, I have always thought of this song when this reading comes around in the lectionary, because the chief priests and the elders of the people, they come up to Jesus and they say, "By what authority are you doing these things, and who gave you this authority?" And I imagine Jesus rolling up his sleeves, dancing around and shaking his fists and railing against the religious and the political establishment, saying, "I fight authority, authority always wins." Now, it's a little of a theological mind twist, because authority ends up winning only because Jesus becomes the authority, but we'll get to that in just a moment. But I can see the priests and the elders questioning, who exactly does this guy think he is? They clearly see Jesus as a potential troublemaker, and again, I see John Cougar Mellencamp in a toga. We always make Jesus out to be the hero, and the priests, elders, Pharisees, and scribes out to be the villains. right? Jesus is right, and they are wrong. It's clear as day. However, I think we only see it that way because A, we know how the story ends. Jesus is the consummate hero who rises from the dead and saves the world. And B, we are viewing the encounter through one lens, the Jesus lens, right? Which makes perfect sense because we're Christians. But that isn't the whole of the story. There is a clash over authority, and we staunchly stand on the side of Jesus. However, we have neglected to recognize that the priests and the elders challenge Jesus because they must. It is their job to push back at him, to protect the religious establishment, to test his authority, and to ascertain if he really is the Messiah. So of course they're going to challenge Jesus' claim to authority. They need to ask him the question, by what authority are you doing these things, and who gave you this authority? The people who have been entrusted to their care and whom they oversee need them to ask this question. And truthfully, no matter how Jesus answers, the others in this story find themselves between a rock and a hard place. Jesus is stirring up trouble, bound to anger Pilate, which may result in him randomly killing people. Conversely, what if Jesus really is the Messiah? What then? There's not an easy answer. So while all these people have gotten a bad rap throughout history because they didn't jump on board the Jesus platform, they really only offer their challenge to Jesus out of faithfulness, not out of unfaithfulness. And I think that is such an important piece to this story. Faith is too important to them to waste their hope on someone who will fail them, who will fail us. So yeah, the chief priests and the elders, they are also fighting authority. It's just that they are fighting authority with a capital A, because unbeknownst to them, they have taken on God. Seems authority is definitely going to win this one. So here's my question, and I admit it's a bit of a backdoor way into thinking about this text. Do we think they should not take on Jesus? Now, before I go on, as I mentioned at the beginning of my sermon, we are all feeling beat up from people taking sides and touting their personal authority and opinions and beliefs. Conflict has become one of the most obvious characteristics of our society today. And as discouraging as that truth is, it appears it's not new. The scene which is laid out before us is ripe for a knockdown, drag-out street fight. But somehow it doesn't turn into that. And that is the Jesus piece. That is the piece that is salvific and necessary for all of humanity. That is a life-giving piece. And that piece, the why it doesn't turn into a street fight, I think that's what we're called to look at today. Why doesn't it turn into a free-for-all with every man, woman, and child for themselves? Well, I've always thought it curious that Jesus asks the priests and elders a question that is essentially unanswerable. I mean, it's totally ingenious on his part. He puts them in their places by pointing out how answers aren't always black and white. They can't answer him, and therefore, because I'm on the side of Jesus, I interpret it as a win for Jesus. But I actually think that Jesus chose to offer his challenge as a question, to reveal to everyone around him that he understands their dilemma. He sees both sides of the story. He acknowledges the legitimate arguments on both parts. He recognizes that change is hard and truth sometimes takes a long time to surface. What Jesus doesn't do is say, "You want to see what I'm made of?" He doesn't puff his chest and dance around the ring and push others out of his way, even if that's what I think he should do. All Jesus does is raise a question for reflection and asks them to ponder and hear the other side. Is John's baptism of human origin or heavenly origin or both? Which son did the Father's will? The first? The second? Both of them? Neither? Not easy questions that they were faced with then. Not easy questions that we are faced with today. And so I must take heart in Jesus himself, the one person in history who could have legitimately pulled off standing above everyone else. And he did not regard equality with God to be something to be exploited. I must trust that what was true then is true today. That Jesus calls all the tax collectors and the prostitutes and the Pharisees and the stay-at-home parents and the social workers and the football players and the military personnel and the black and the white, calls all into the very heart of God. There is no climbing into the ring with Jesus. Jesus took his calling of humility and love and acceptance and salvation so seriously that he bowed before humanity and was led to the cross for it. And that's what the authority of God looks like. In some ironic way, we place our hope in John Mellencamp's prophetic words. I fight authority. But the authority of God always wins.